Hey people, welcome to this tutorial series about world building in Unreal Engine 5. We will talk about a lot about creating tools that will facilitate the world building in Unreal Engine to deform landscapes, create forests, scatter some things, I don't know, fences, cliffs, stuff like that. Anything that you can find useful for creating massive open worlds. We will be using a lot of Houdini for it and creating our own custom tools inside of Houdini and then importing them to Unreal 5 and using the Houdini engine to communicate between the two softwares and have feedback inside of Unreal. So let's start. First of all, I will go through the explanation why we are not using some of the tools that are included inside of Unreal 5 out of the box. So I am here on my tutorial map. It's basically the open world map that you get when creating a new blank level, with just a part of the world unloaded, or rather only a part of it loaded here. So we have a landscape brush, which is a relatively new thing that came up with Unreal 5 at some point. This is a plane with a landscape height patch component added to it. So it can deform the landscape, that's all great. You also have a texture landscape patch that you can use, but we are only showcasing this why it's not really as good as it could be. So the problem arises when, for example, I have the entire world loaded, which is not usually the case, but let's test it out. And it's immediately very unresponsive. But it's usually not that much of a problem, so we can go back to here, unload the entire thing and just load this section here, and we have our landscape deforming to this landscape patch, and that's cool and dandy. But with this landscape height patch circle and the texture, we don't really get all that much of control because we rely only on a circle in terms of this height patch and on a texture that we provide to the texture height patch. So it's not really ideal. The other version or the other set of tools that we can use is the landmass plugin and the water plugin. And both of those, I believe water is dependent on landmass. So let's enable landmass and see what that gets us. Let's restart it. I don't need to save this plane, doesn't matter. Let's wait for it to restart. Close this and load the tutorial map. Okay, and now when I go to landscape mode, manage blueprints, I can add a custom brush landmass and a set of other things, but we'll start with custom brush landmass. Here, add it to the level. Now the entire landscape is deformed weirdly, but let's just move this somewhere and it will reinitialize, and that's all good. So we have this landmass brush over here, and we can draw a spline and basically create the entire like mountain. We have a lot of parameters to play with in this menu over here. So we can check some of those. And that's fine. But the same problem arises when we load the entire world, obviously, as it was with the height patches. But let's see what happens when I save these assets now. It also created a landmass brush manager, which is kind of important, a general manager for all of those render targets that we need, or the landmass system actually needs to update the brushes that you create. But as I said, let's see what happens when I restart the engine now. Cool, let's load the map. And immediately we have this issue again, so let's move this brush, the brush, not the brush manager, that's important. Let's move it, and we're good. But what you can notice already is the problem, and it's that the entire world, the entire map is loaded. Even though world partition is unloaded in those sections, you can see when I switch the proxies, those proxies live in those unloaded sections. So that entire landmass system and the landmass brush manager, all that entire landmass system and water system by extension forces your entire map, entire landscape, not really the map, but the entire landscape to be loaded at all times. Which, if you have an absolutely massive open world, or a very detailed landscape, let's say you're using nanite, or you have a lot of deformation and adding to the details of those height maps, and you have a lot of layers, paint layers, or general edit layers, it is going to be difficult for you to work with that. And besides, since it forces your landscape to be always loaded, now when I move it, it is laggy. It is not really that fun to work with or that smooth to work with. And the same goes for landscape patches right now, because if we use both of those systems, obviously, because the entire landscape is loaded, the feedback is slower. And I am only using the default landscape that comes with the open level, with the default level, as I said, default open world level. So it can only grow in complexity, which can be a problem. So that's why we are not going to use any of those systems. Let's disable landmass and disable landscape patches, and we can restart the engine again. Yeah, load the map. Yeah, those are not valid, but I don't really care about that because it's from the testing of the landscape brushes. Cool, so we can delete that plane. And just for testing purposes, because we don't really care about working on a small partition right now, we can and we will use some Houdini tools that I prepared. So we have a test landscape tool, which is a very, very incredibly basic tool that adds some detail to the entire landscape. So let's cook it, and I will show you the output in a second. Okay, Houdini Engine failed to create a session as usual, which is pretty normal, but we'll create it manually over here. Gotta wait a moment. The first time when the engine is started, it can take a while. So I have this tool that I created that basically just adds some noise to the height map. That's fine. I'll open that in Houdini Session Sync to show you what it actually does. Because what it does, in the meantime, I'll try to explain what it does is it creates a separate edit layer which contains the information that we provided, that we created in Houdini. So we have to cook it again. So let me select the tool. Let's cook it again. Cool. And now I should have the node inside of Houdini. Let's go inside. And this is the HDA in question. It basically, or it doesn't. That's fun. Always fun. Let's recook it again. And you can already see some problems coming in. But here, yeah. We have the landscape that we've imported. What I'm doing here is I'm removing, I'm just setting some variables for the landscape itself, and I am removing the layer of procedural edits because I don't need it. And the layer of procedural edits is the one that is created by us inside of this Houdini engine. Later on, I am telling the Houdini engine to do the output mode 1, which basically means that it edits the landscape and doesn't create a new one. If I was to change it to 0, we would have a default or a new landscape created every time, which is not necessarily what you want. And this is just the name of the layer that it outputs. And this is the output. So as you can see, first of all, let me show you. Oh, here, this is the layer procedural edits output, the same as we specified inside of this attribute wrangle here. So as you can see, we have a small problem. Every time I recook, I basically re-import the entire landscape again, so it builds on top of each layer again, which is not what I want. And maybe there is something that I don't understand about it, but I am unable to simply filter for the layers that don't include the previous information or the previous noise, because it builds on top of each other, on top of everything. I tried to do it with a blast over here, but obviously it's not working. I don't really mind it, really, because what I think should happen is I should have separate height layers. However, I have the landscape options to export height data per edit layer, but it doesn't really seem to work. I seem to get an emerged height data every time, which is not really ideal in this case. So that's one problem. And the second problem that we have, let me go to landscape and remove this entire layer because we will not need it again. Oh, I should also mention that I have removed the middle layer, so I'm just working on the base layer, the flat middle layer. I have another tool, which is a tutorial landscape brush. So let me cook it and see what happens. That's definitely not what I wanted to have happen. So let's delete that layer. Both layers, procedural edits and procedural brush. Let's remove those. Let's save it just in case. And let me rebuild it. It should result in a different output. Yeah. So don't mind the entire area around it with the landscape layered on top of itself, really. Let's just look at what happens in the landscape brush components here. So I'm inputting the landscape. Or actually, hold up, let me turn off everything, the visibility on everything, so that's easier to see. Cool. So I'm importing the landscape. I am importing some brushes, brush objects, let's say. I am projecting them on the height field and outputting it with the same outputs, except now it's a different layer. What I could do to alleviate that issue of layering on top of each other, let's fix that really quickly, actually. I'll do a height wrangle and set this height to 0. And what that will do is it will basically give me a flat layer that is the size of the entire landscape, and just have this procedural edits from the brush, and that will be treated inside of Unreal as an additive layer. So let's save this node. I don't have to rebuild it. I can just recook it. Unless I get a crash. Okay, I'm not. That's good. Let's also nuke this layer just in case. Here we go. Save it. I'll remove the test landscape tool just in case and have work only with the brush, rebuild it to refresh everything. Now, that could be a crash. of the Houdini. Yeah, that looks like it. So let's force it down. First to shut down. Cool. Recreate the session. Find the tool, rebuild it. Cool. So now you don't have those ugly, the ugly transformation over here. Let's go back to Houdini Session Sync so you can see what's going on. But the entire point that I'm getting at is like that I can have those object brushes, and they will update the landscape when I move them, and it's happening quite quickly. Maybe not as interactive as if it was a native Unreal tool, because it has to call Houdini Engine externally to cook everything, but it's fine. The problem is that I am unable from this level to manipulate each of those brushes on its own. So let's just quickly go through the brushes tool. So we're doing this height equal to 0 to flatten, just height field project, nothing else, and export. And I am unable to do any parameters that are specific per object. I could probably do something really convoluted and add a massive amount of nesting menus over here that would only affect a new object by index, but it would really quickly go out of proportion and be really difficult to manage. I could probably do some multiple Houdini nodes and chain them together to have the output that I want. So for example, if I wanted to from Houdini Engine level change the scale, or for example shape it differently, like add a mountain, and what I'm telling about right now is, for example, add a mountain noise to deform the position. Let me crank it up because those cubes are massive. So if I wanted to do something like this, but each cube had a different offset of this noise, I cannot change the offset per object. That's the entire problem. Fortunately, I have found a solution for it. And the solution for it is, is a different version of the Houdini plugin. So that different version of the Houdini plugin is showcased on this level. So this is the project for Houdini Engine, AP Houdini Engine, which is a fork of the default one. I'll have all of the links in the description below, so don't worry about anything right now. Basically, I have to have a different Unreal project because both plugins cannot coexist at the same time. So you have to choose. But I have two tools, the test landscape and the AP landscape brush. The test landscape is basically the same tool that we used before. So let's cook it and see the output. And I'm getting some nice detail from the height field noise. I cook again, nothing happens. That's good. Let's see here. I am doing the exact same thing as I did in the previous tool, except now I'm just setting the height here to 0 for demonstration purposes to flatten the entire layer and do the additive thing that we did before. I also have the shared memory volume output, which is speeding up the process and is a part of the plugin. Now, let's disable this flattening here. Let's bypass it and see what happens. First of all, you get the entire thing, that's cool. You cook, nothing happens. But obviously now, after this change, you should or you have to re-import the landscape. You can do it by rebuilding the tool or by clicking this button here. And re-importing the landscape will give us the whole data. Now, if I recook it, it will keep going up, which is the exact same issue that we had before. And that's really not ideal. However, here we have access to landscape layer filters, so we can import the exact landscape layers, both including height layers or paint layers that you want. So I want only the base layer to be imported. So I set up the filter here, and I only import the base layer every time. If I re-import the landscape as I did just now, and I cook it, nothing happens, which is the expected output, expected result. And I'm importing just the base layer as shown here. So those landscape filters are super powerful and can give us access to a lot of data, or restrict some data to not export and import the entire thing all over again, which will save on some iteration time and memory bandwidth, which is really cool. Now, let's remove this, or not really, I don't think I have to remove it. Let's check out what the landscape brush does. So landscape brush has inputs for landscape and just some curve brushes. Okay, nothing really fancy. So let's cook it. And I have those curves, or rather the areas that are inside of those curves, projected onto the landscape. That's really cool. I can move those. But that really doesn't change much from the state that there was before in the original vanilla Houdini engine. However, in this plugin, you have access to Houdini Engine here in the drop-down menu, and you have some Houdini assets, or rather a list of all of the Houdini assets that you have here. You can add those easily here, and have some other fields for mask and edit. But what we care about is to, well, click on this tool and select a curve. Let's say this one, yeah. And now click on edit. And what you can see here is a whole menu of parameters that I can create uniquely for this piece of geometry. I only added a single parameter now, which is the scale. So I can change the scale of this brush only, right? And have a separate set of parameters for this brush. Now, this is crazy. This is absolutely insane, and will give us a lot of possibilities to create amazing tools. Just imagine different layering of different noises, flattening tools, painting tools, and it just works, right? Because we can have different brushes and have a separate list of parameters over here. If you really want, you can even group those parameters into a custom data asset that you create in C++, and have this data asset supply all of the parameters for some brushes that you want, and you can change them globally in one place, which is crazy cool. Now let's move it down to 1, and let's, just for demonstration, unload the entire world partition. It's pinned. Okay, perfect. So I just had to save those assets, and now I can unpin them and I can unload them, which is great. And let's load only this section, or maybe a bit bigger and to the left. Yeah, maybe slightly bigger over here. Okay. And let's move this brush over to Narnia. Cool. As you can see, I can update this part over here without a problem. Now let's remember more or less where everything is. And now I can update this brush. And you could see that the old part blinked and just went away, which is great. Now let's unload this again. And I have to save this entire thing and unpin them. So that was the issue that was there before. I could probably do it faster, but I don't really care at this point. Cool. And let's check it out over here. Go back to the landscape brush. Cool. I can do edits here, right? Without affecting whatever's happening over here. You can still see brush being in the same place and the height being already set. Well, after moving it, obviously you will erase some stuff. And yeah, this is really cool. I will hopefully do a whole series on it with, first of all, we will create a really cool, really big brush tool with many features supporting noises, flattening, masking, painting, everything. And then we will move to maybe doing cliffs or maybe scattering forests. So there's a lot of possibilities inside of that tool, which I hopefully will be able to showcase to you. Well, I haven't really shown the entire Houdini file for it, which is probably what you are here for as well. So let's quickly do that before I forget again. So this is the Houdini file over here. So this is the Houdini file over here, and I'm doing the landscape input, flattening it, and doing a for loop of curve brushes. So for each curve brush, I am doing something, right? So let's see what happens. Those are the curves that I'm inputting from Unreal. I am converting them to a Houdini Engine representation, which is also a node from the plugin. I'm creating a surface. And here is the transform node. The pivot is set to the geometry's center. So I want to uniformly scale from its center. And the attribute that I'm using is a primitive attribute that comes over from the primitive that is incoming from Unreal. So 0 input, primitive 0, because it's only a single piece of geometry, and we are doing this for loop for each primitive. So that really doesn't matter. And my primitive attribute is curve area scale. Cool. I'm projecting this to my landscape and adding a new shape. I'm just getting a previous iteration from this feedback node. And I'm doing it by piece, feedback each iteration, primitives. Cool. And same jazz as before on the other tools. Now, what's kind of important here is to look at the properties. Yep. And this is the entire parameter block. I have input, landscape, curve brushes with the name of curves, and I have a separate folder which is curves prim attributes, or rather curves prim attributes, which is a requirement of the plugin to have the whole set of parameters that live here under this folder to be per primitive, so per object that you input. And I can have this on curves or on points. So I can have separate attributes for each point on the curve. And that's pretty much it. So as I said, hope you enjoyed this entire thing and hope you will like the following tutorials that I make. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.